Good morning. From the seats you're sitting in now to the building we're in right now to how you got to school today, you're always around a process called welding. And since it's around pretty much everywhere in our daily lives, it's kind of ignored and not a lot's known about it. So today I want to kind of go over a brief concept of what welding is and a brief history of it and how it's so important to our daily lives. Basically, what is welding? The Google definition of welding is to combine or form a harmonious or effective whole, which is pretty much bringing two parts together. Brief history of where welding came from. This is probably 2nd or 3rd century. It was a process called forge welding, and that's basically a really hot fire and a hammer, and they're able to actually beat metal together and make early weapons and armor back in the 2nd and 3rd century. So welding's actually been around for a pretty long time. National Geographic did a really cool documentary about old Japan and how they made samurai swords, and they actually brought in a metallurgist who basically a person who studies metal, and it's comparable to steel that we have today. So it's pretty incredible how they did it almost 2,000 years ago. That's a little brief history. A big jump that happened was the discovery of electricity. And if you think about it, a bolt of lightning, all it is a big arc of electricity going from the sky to the ground, just grounding itself. And lightning is one of the hottest and brightest things known to man. A bolt of lightning is around 50,000 degrees, and it's about 12 times the brightness of the sun. So what you're actually doing today with today's technology is harnessing a bolt of lightning into using its heat to actually weld. So if you think about it, using electricity to weld, you're acting like Thor. So how Thor is actually able to control bolts of lightning, that's what a welder is actually doing. Is he's using the heat of electricity jumping from one part to another and melting metal. Here's a little brief diagram. That's that little arc right there where it says arc. That's where all your heat and brightness is coming from. That's most processes of welding is arc welding, and with where arc welding is used is pretty much everywhere. Like I said, food processing, freeways, nuclear plants. So I mean, all your power for your homes, your gas to heat your homes, water. It's all pretty much dependent on welding. A couple processes that aren't really known besides arc welding. This is a really interesting process called explosion welding. And basically where it was discovered was World War I. Some of the first armored vehicles were getting hit by, there were some of the first explosive shells. And what they found out is two dissimilar metals were actually from the heat of an explosion getting stuck together, and it was actually a really good weld. And that's where they discovered it. And how that's important to us today is a lot of refineries, since you can't really weld two different metals together, they use explosion welding to pretty much stick them together. So refineries, when they need to contain a lot of corrosive materials, you can have the one side of a piece of metal to be really corrosive resistant, and another side to be, stainless steel to make it easier to keep clean and all that. So that's why it's really important for today. Another cool process is thermite welding. if anyone's heard of a thermite grenade. They're using pretty much the heat of thermite to melt two pieces of metal together, and that's exclusively used for railroad tracks. So, and that's basically how they put two pieces of railroad together, and without that process, you wouldn't have railroad tracks today. So all the goods and stuff in stores that are moved from trains are dependent on that. I want to, now that you kind of know that it's how important it is and how big of a part it is, there are some fun stuff you can do with it. Here's just some ideas of some gifts you can do and stuff around the houses. And I want to leave you, I totally recommend going across the street to the welding department. The guy with the polka dot hat is Will Daniels. He's one of the head instructors. He's a good friend of mine. And I open door policy, so I really recommend poking your head in there to figure out if you guys want to be Thor or not. Thank you.
So, Jason, what did you think?
I thought it was great. I thought the commentary was great, and he explained things well, even without cards. And he seemed really comfortable and confident. He was pretty good.
All right, well, very positive things to say there. I think that there's a lot of this that is excellent. You know, you do a nice job speaking to the audience. You're not overly dependent on the notes. That's the delivery stuff. That's the least important stuff. The other stuff, though, is also pretty solid. You've got, I mean, it's kind of organized around the three types of welding that you mentioned. So the structure is pretty simple. It's a topical method of organization there. You have a little bit of background about why it's important. You come back to that towards the end. So it does give it a sense of completeness there. I think that that works well. I think you could have a little bit more supporting material in your descriptions. I know that this is a process that you know and understand. The one reference that I got was to the National Geographic special that you mentioned, and other than that, I don't know that you cited any other sources in the presentation. So there's history that you're talking about. There might be explanations. If you've taken a welding class, there might be texts or manuals that you use there that would have been a good place to maybe get some additional information. Also, as a, you know, let's face it, any field, if you go to an encyclopedia, there's going to be information on it. Don't be shy about using some reference works too to give you some more substantive material. That said, I do think that you explained things pretty basically. I understand how they discovered explosive welding. I just don't understand how you would do something like that. The other thing makes sense. What do they do? Set bombs between things that they want to connect? You kind of have to explain that a little bit. So I thought it was more ambiguous on the last two things that you're talking about than it was on the first one. The first one was a little bit clearer. You had a little diagram that kind of showed those things. Plus you've given us some historical information about how that worked. The other ones, not quite as complete in their descriptions. They were interesting, but not quite as complete. I thought you had a little bit of fun visualizing yourself as Thor, controlling the lightning and using it to, build the world around there. I think that's a good way to do that, and you're having some fun with the presentation too, which is what you ought to be doing. Audiences want to enjoy the experience. They want to get something out of this that is not just, well, here's a piece of information maybe I'll hold on to. I'm going to sit here for 6 or 7 minutes. I'm going to listen to this. I hope that I'm enjoying it, and I appreciate every time somebody makes an effort, even when they don't work. I appreciate when people make an effort. I thought your Thor reference worked, and it was fun. So people don't be shy about doing those kinds of things. And then the delivery things, like I already said, I thought you did a pretty good job on that. I like at the end when you come to your own experience and you say, here's the instructor that I had on the right here or on the left here, and he's got an open door policy. Come on by and see what goes on in the welding department. I think that's a great idea. That's a good finish for the presentation. All right, thank you.